So, I had other plans for this week's video, but I had someone comment in my last Trope video about the High Crusade, and how it had an arc about a married couple drifting apart and getting back together. The person commenting even mentioned that they were shocked that more books in fiction don't cover this. This was too good of a topic to pass up, so I'm putting evil fantasy religions on hold for another day. This is a complaint that I have heard before. Romance fiction likes to focus on couples getting together, but rarely covers anything after that. It's like we're supposed to believe that they just lived happily ever after, or something. It even creates this awkwardness when a couple gets together earlier in the story, and there's still lots of conflict that needs to be resolved. This is part of the reason why the leads don't usually partner up until the end of the story, because it lets the author avoid writing the actual relationship. I remember when Sword Art Online first came out, and one of the few things it did right was to have Kirito pick a girl and stick with her. Even though he had other women throwing themselves at him, he stays loyal to Asuna. Unfortunately, Reki Karahara doesn't seem to know how to write the actual relationship, which is why they come off like they have as much attraction between them as a weak magnet and a piece of wood. I think that might be why they kept the two of them as separate as possible in the second season. Writing the drama, the thrill, the roller coaster of emotions that leads to two people becoming a couple is actually pretty easy. Writing what happens after they get off the roller coaster and have to actually be in a relationship that isn't just about the chemistry is a lot harder. I hear people saying a lot of this is just the creators writing what they know, and a lot of them simply don't know how to write a relationship beyond the initial dating phase. I think this plays a role, but I think it's a relatively minor one, because there's a lot of other reasons why this kind of romance arc gets overlooked. First, we have to consider the market. If you're writing to a young adult audience, they don't care about maintaining relationships. They're still at the stage of life where they're just trying to get into a relationship. Maintaining relationships is for older, more mature audiences. Emphasis on more mature. The romance genre is, sadly, not usually written for a mature audience. As the saying goes, you can't stay young forever, but you can be immature for the rest of your life. I think that's an old saying anyway. You might have noticed that the kinds of women, and it is almost exclusively women, who read romance novels are not the most mature people when it comes to their expectations for dating and relationships. Heck, a lot of romance novels are ultimately just porn, but for women. And it seems to have the same effect on a female gooner's brain that conventional porn has on a male gooner. The thing is, the people reading these kinds of stories are looking for the emotional roller coaster of the dating stage, not the actual relationship. There's even an old Arthurian legend about Sir Gawain and the Loathly Lady that says that what women want most is the thrill of a fresh romance. And a lot of it comes down to the subject of novelty. Novelty is a major ingredient in keeping a romantic relationship going. It's not just about wanting a new partner, it's about wanting to try new things, not just in the bedroom, but in the relationship itself. This is part of the reason why so many people, both men and women, find intelligence attractive. Sometimes it has to do with the fact that smart people make more money, but it also has to do with creativity. The smarter you are, the more you can think of new things to try with your partner. Now, a romantic arc about a couple struggling in this department can make for an excellent story, but there's another problem that writers and audiences struggle with when it comes to maintaining a relationship. For a couple to have a falling out, and then to get back together, the reason their relationship struggles has to be something that most normal people would consider forgivable, or at least understandable. It can't be something where only one side of the couple is firmly in the wrong, like an issue of cheating, or one person acting like a jerk. Either both parties have to have their flaws, or the problem is something that isn't really a flaw to begin with. For example, it could be that they both have a conflict of their passions, like one person having a hobby that conflicts with the other. Neither person is necessarily in the wrong, or at least they're both equally in the wrong. A compromise where one person sacrifices their passion for the other isn't going to satisfy the audience, unless the person who makes the sacrifice receives something in return. Something more substantial than just maintaining a relationship that demands sacrifice from them, but doesn't demand sacrifice from the other person. All of this boils down to one thing. In order for us to root for a couple patching up their relationship, either they both have to have relatable flaws, or they have to find some way to compromise where both people will have to give a little. And this doesn't work if one character is intended to be the author's self-insert, or an audience surrogate. Again, remember what a lot of romance fiction is meant to be. Rarely is it intended to show two fully fleshed out characters that fit well together, which is what you have to have in order to do a story arc that focuses on maintaining the relationship instead of starting one. Now, there are a few examples I do want to point out that have done this kind of story really well, and for some reason, They all come from really ridiculous cartoons and an abridged series. For starters, we have the abridged Kirito and Asuna from SAO Abridged. Unlike their canon counterparts, these two actually feel like real teenagers. Kirito, in the abridged series, is exactly the kind of obnoxious nerd who is good at video games and almost nothing else. And Asuna is an outright sociopath who more or less gets close to Kirito because no one else will put up with her. It even becomes a running gag.
So what's in the box, Pinky? You running through dumpsters for your next masterpiece?
Well, funny you should ask. This box is everything I was able to salvage from my shop after your friend Asuna.
Hey, Kirito! The commander wants to...
Ah! I didn't say anything, I swear!
Wait for me! I know a shortcut!
Things come to a head during the episode where they both realize that they got married way too early, but neither one of them wants to blink first and admit that it was a bad idea. And here we have two flawed characters who are equally in the wrong. Yui, the psychologist AI built into the video game that they're both trapped in, puts it like this.
All of that changed when I found you two.
Aww.
The most broken, sociopathic players I had ever laid eyes on. Less people than a loose collection of character defects. But somehow, together, you were happy. Everything I knew about human relationships told me that one would eventually kill the other. And yet, no matter how often you fought, your bond only seemed to grow stronger.
It's probably worth mentioning that even the fans of the original Sword Art Online will often admit that the abridged series is better. But our leading couple resolves their issues by the end when they realize that all they had to do was talk things out like adults, which, given that they're both teenagers, it's understandable that they didn't initially do. Next, let's talk about Moxie and Millie from Hell of a Boss, a web series that I probably can't show you any clips from without YouTube smacking this video down for copyright. Somehow, one of the best married couples I've seen in fiction in the last 10 years is between a pair of literal hellspawn. These two are usually the most stable couple in the entire series, and despite the fact that they're both demonic assassins who enjoy killing people for a living, they're usually the voices of reason with everyone else in the show. Both of them. Particularly whenever their boss Blitzo is involved. But, as we see in the episode Unhappy Campers, things are not always rosy keen in their marital life. One of the main complaints about Millie as a character is that she doesn't get as much screen time as Moxie, and that she's somehow less of a character than he is. But then come this episode, and we find out that there's a reason for that. Millie tries to be a supportive wife for her husband, but that often leaves her stuck in his shadow, and in her effort not to outshine Moxie, who has a lot of issues with self-esteem, she ends up putting her own goals and desires on hold. Unhappy Campers shows us that Millie has a lot of talents that never showed up previously, and it shows us that Millie has depths that were being buried. And the episode involves Moxie coming to realize that he shouldn't care so much about what random strangers think of him when he has her, and ends with him recognizing that he needs to stop hogging the spotlight. Finally, one of the best couples in all of fiction, from one of the greatest works of fiction in all of human history, we have to talk about Marceline and Princess Bubblegum from Adventure Time. Another show that YouTube likes to block my videos if I include any clips. Now for this one, we need some context. And spoiler warning, for anyone who hasn't seen this absolute masterpiece of a show. Princess Bubblegum is effectively the god empress of the Candy Kingdom. She was the first truly sentient candy person that split off from a radioactive mass of bubblegum known as the Mother Gum, and the first person she met as she was forming into a person of her own was her brother, Nettie. Nettie is an example of a hyper-autistic brother who can't socialize and might not even be properly sentient. It's hard to tell. But having to take care of Nettie shaped Bubblegum's personality into the kind of person who is used to being the most competent person in the room, and bears the responsibility for keeping a less competent person alive and happy. In the first few seasons, we get a few hints that Princess Bubblegum isn't quite the classic princess she pretends to be. By season 5, it starts to become undeniable that she is a dictator. A benevolent dictator, but as the series shows, sometimes that's worse than a cruel dictator. Bubblegum is fully aware that no mortal kingdom lasts forever. She's lived too long to believe otherwise. And she doesn't age, so she's been around for centuries, but she's not fully immortal. So she will, in all likelihood, be around when her Candy Kingdom gets wiped out like every other nation in history. As a natural result of her upbringing, her eternal youth, and her lack of anyone above her to hold her accountable, Bubblegum is a big believer in the old saying, the ends justify the means. Sacrifice one person? It's worth it if it saves many more. Ruin one of her friendships? It's okay. Those friends are only going to live for another 80 years or so, and she's got to think about the big picture. What stops the Lich from wiping out the Candy Kingdom? What prevents the Fire Kingdom from becoming a military threat to a race of people made out of sugar, who produce a lot of heat when burned? Something they actually mention in-universe. The problem that Bubblegum struggles with is that there are no ends. That's the biggest message in all of Adventure Time, from the very first episode to the fact that we're not even sure if the franchise is done making new material. Nothing ever ends. There is always another threat to the Candy Kingdom that pops up as soon as the last one gets driven off. And Bubblegum, repeatedly, finds herself with no real lasting friendships, all of those sacrifices, all of those compromises, and all it buys her people is a little more time until the next calamity arrives. While Bubblegum is trying to be a good person, she is at best lawful neutral. Then we have Marceline. Marceline's upbringing was radically different. She was actually born before the nuclear Great Mushroom War that created the world of Adventure Time, and she was already supernatural due to her dad being a Lovecraftian demon from another dimension. Marceline inherited the power to suck up people's souls from her dad, her one and only means for self-defense in the apocalypse, and this regularly terrified the people around her, including her own mom. Without going into too much detail, Marceline found herself alone in the apocalypse, having lost her mother and thinking she drove her off with her scary soul-sucking powers. And while she did find an adoptive parent in Simon, that didn't last too long either, since he lost himself to the Ice Crown. And in addition to scaring people off, Marceline also has the classic problem of an immortal who has to watch everyone around her grow old and die, and so she knows that no relationship she has with anyone will last forever. Her moral code has decayed, and living in the moment has become her primary motivation. In short, she's chaotic neutral. You might think partnering up these two immortals would make perfect sense, and on paper it does. But, as early as Season 3, we get an episode implying that they were a couple, but had a falling out. Then when Obsidian was released, we get to see why these two split apart. For starters, remember when I said that Bubblegum is used to being the only competent person in the room? For the most part, I imagine that Marceline's music never threatened that, but against the Lava Dragon, for the first time, Bubblegum's tech fails, and Marceline is the one to drive the beast back with her song, which also happens to be their breakup song. Marceline calls Bubblegum out for being a dictator in this scene as well, and it would be easy to write this off as being entirely PB's fault. But, as you might have already guessed, there's more to it than that. Remember back in What Was Missing when Marceline accused Bubblegum of judging her for not being perfect? And Bubblegum denies ever saying that she needed to be perfect? It might be easy to miss, but in the song Woke Up, where Marceline is chewing out Bubblegum, we also see that Marceline isn't good at communicating her feelings in any way that isn't abrasive. It's just not a skill that she ever had to develop. The best way to tell your girlfriend that she acts like a dictator is not in a diss track in front of a crowd of people. Marceline also clearly never understood why Bubblegum is such a control freak. It's not like it's an even 50-50 split over who's at fault, but they were both flawed. As Marceline later puts it in the show, they were messed up kids who taught themselves how to live. And while it takes them an unknown amount of time, probably more than a normal human lifespan, these two do repair their relationship. But it's not until after they finally start to understand each other in ways that they were too stubborn to try before. These are all just examples of ways to set up a fictional relationship that struggles and gets back together. Again, you more or less have to sacrifice any chance of your romantic leads being an audience surrogate. A relationship drama like this trades the opportunity of fantasy for a chance to teach real-life lessons, and not every audience is going to jive with that, no matter how much you might think they should. But I can say with some degree of certainty that there is a market for this, even if it's not as big as the market for self-insert romance fiction. And now, today's featured game is Return from the Core, a game so similar to Core Keeper, I genuinely thought it was a sequel when I first got it. Return from the Core is a base-building survival game that doesn't have a multiplayer option like Core Keeper, but makes up for it by letting you romance a host of cute monster girls. And the romance mechanic is absolutely hilarious. It's like the creators knew they couldn't put in a realistic dating sim, so they just have an affinity stat for each girl that you raise in hilarious ways. For example, the monster waifus will gain affinity for you when you put them to work. I'm not kidding. Getting the demon girl to cook for you makes her like you more. You can also speed up the process by giving them gifts, which differ depending on the girl in question, but usually include things like food, random toys you find digging underground, and furniture. Lots of furniture. Once you've given a girl enough armchairs made out of pocket lint and monster boogers, she'll usually have some kind of final quest for you to tie the knot. And raising a girl's affinity is important for unlocking new crafting recipes. It's not required for your progression through the story, but it definitely helps. And the story is the best part of the game. Because while this game doesn't have the best romance writing, it more than makes up for it with its world building and plot. I don't want to spoil it for you, but let's just say that I was genuinely shocked when I made it to the 5th layer. Everything up until that point had been generic enough that it didn't bother me, but layer 5 is when things go from standard crafting survival to body horror nightmare fuel. Definitely not for the faint of heart. Now just a reminder, today's topic was inspired by a commenter asking why more stories don't cover relationships being maintained beyond the initial dating stage, and if you have more questions about writing that you want me to answer, let me know in the comment section below. Alright, that's all for today. Hit that like and subscribe button, check out my books on Amazon, and thank you all, and goodbye.